Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, and Monday is the day that I invite you to support the mission of the Masters, which is the work that we're doing. If you feel so inclined, you could make an ongoing donation through the Patreon website. Wonderful website for connecting people with resources to people with creative work to do. And I'm very grateful for the generosity of so many of you and the enthusiasm for this through Patreon. It's really made it possible to just do everything I can think of to do right now, with technical support primarily, and helping translations of Lightbearer and the publishing of Lightbearer, which is my book about Swamiji, and now in Spanish and Italian, and also doing audio recordings. I am going to do an audio recording of one of my books, of my 4 books. One of them, I don't have an audio book, so I'm going to put that out soon. And we're also putting out, I've been recording a couple of other audio books of Swami Kriyananda's books, and it's a pretty open-ended project I'll keep working on with the support of all of you. You can also just go to my website, Asha .com or .org, and you can donate. One-time donations can happen through there, or ongoing through PayPal as well if you prefer. And please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't. We're inching up toward 10,000 subscribers, and it'll be fun when it turns over. So, my friends, let's begin. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dear Swamiji, help us to understand the words that you've written in this book, to feel through them your consciousness, your understanding of how these words apply in our real life, how it's translated into feeling and thought and action. Help us to relate to others in this world with the wonderful sensitivity and clarity that you brought to all your friendships. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen. So, we are in chapter 11, I believe, of this book, which is out of 12 chapters, but there's a lot in chapter 11. It's called Work with People's Strengths, but it goes in lots of directions. So, the last section we read, we were talking about the power of positive magnetism to create what we're trying to create, and the mistaken idea that people have that the way to overcome our limitations is to focus on our limitations. Whereas Swami says with great force, the way to overcome our limitations is by creating a positive flow of magnetism that will just sweep them into that flow. So the last sentence the last paragraph in relation to those ideas, as a man of wisdom once said, Swamiji wrote this book as J. Donald Walters, and he never makes reference to his connection, his Indian roots, because he wants this book to be accepted on its own terms, and he feels that his connection to an Indian guru will not increase his credibility. So he says, as a man of wisdom once said, and that man of wisdom was Paramahansa Yogananda, don't try to banish the darkness by beating at it with a stick. Turn on the light, and the darkness will vanish as though it had never been. It's just such an interesting thought in itself, isn't it? You can come into the room and you can shout at the darkness, you can wail about the darkness, you can complain about the darkness. But if you light a candle, then the darkness just simply disappears, because light banishes darkness. And it's sort of putting the cap on everything that we talked about the last session, about how the power of positive energy is the way to banish negativity. It's the light that you turn on. So try also, as much as possible, to let a job grow out of the person himself, out of his nature and personality, out of his ability to handle the task, out of his special interest in it. Don't ever look upon him as a mere instrument for getting a job done. Now, what he means by that, let me think how to say this. I talked about it before, but how Swamiji would never take on a project unless there was someone available for whom working on that project would benefit them personally. Even if it was a good project for the work as a whole, he never tried to sort of like make people fit his projects. He would look at the people first and then create the projects around them. Or if he had to draw someone into a project, there had to be some affinity with it, just some ability to expand one's own awareness to really work with it. And also to, this is how he said, let the job grow out of the person. It might be that the way you would approach this job would be in this particular manner, but rather than sitting your subordinate down and saying, do this, do this, do this, what you want to do is you want to explain what the essential goal is. You want to explain perhaps, how it would feel to you when it was being done properly. But then see what their own temperament would incline them to do. It's a very fine art of being a leader, which is, leadership for a leader, the medium of your expression is other people's energy. So just like a painter has to have a very fine understanding of all the colors and how the colors work with each other, mix together, contrast with each other, you have to have a very fine understanding of who the people you're working with are and what pigment they can contribute to the whole. And everything we've been talking about has been about how to bring the best out of them. And this is just one more part of it. Try to help them express themselves in the context of what you're trying to accomplish. Okay. In a large undertaking, it is impossible not to have to work more closely with some people than with others. So this is just the realistic, and I've also talked about this a lot. Give the most energy to the people who are most in tune with you. Build a team around yourself of people who are in harmony with your ideas. I know in the life that I've had here in this community, which has been 30 years of it, my friend Karen Gamow has worked closely. We've worked closely together for all this time. And we've always been just very in tune with each other. And she has abilities that I don't have. And I say frankly that a great deal of what I've been able to accomplish is because in working closely with her, she's been able to manifest many things that I knew needed to be done, but I never could have manifested myself. But out of her personality, in music, in marketing, in communicating in various ways, it just would have been impossible. So there's been a very close association that's developed. She's done it in her own way, but because of the attunement we have with each other, it's been almost an effortless partnership. And I thank you, God. She's one example. There have been a number of others, but it's really been worthwhile to cultivate the relationships with those that you're in tune with. And if you're trying not to show favorites, if you're trying to always be egalitarian, it just doesn't work that way. However, be impartial in your respect and friendship for all. You may not be able to work closely with everyone or spend maximum amount of time with everyone, but you must never be accused of having favorites. If anybody says to you, oh, you always, I remember at a certain point many years ago, someone said something like that to me. It wasn't true, but the perception was true, if I can say that. I was allowing things to look as if I had favorites. And you have to be very, very careful about that, because that just sort of disintegrates trust. So you have to just be there as completely supportive and giving for everybody who's working for you, and not like, oh, well, I'll do it for so-and-so, but I won't bother for this one. And the same, he uses two words. Well, he uses the word impartial first, but the second is respect and friendship. Those are really beautiful words when you stop and think about them. Respect. I know what you're contributing. I recognize you as a valuable human being. I know that you have talents, and I know that you have needs and responsibilities. I respect you. And friendship, meaning that I will do anything I can to help you. And that's what real friendship isn't, just saying, oh, I love you, you're wonderful. It's not a lot about flattering people. It's about really standing by them. I mentioned a few days ago somewhere in these sessions, the friend of mine who, when he realized, and he just completely outside of Ananda, when he was running a factory, and one of his very good workers started falling asleep on the job, and he was working a night shift. And so my friend went to him as a friend. Hey, he didn't go to him as a boss and say, you fall asleep one more night, you don't have work. It's like, why have things suddenly changed? New baby in the house, and the baby was colicky, wasn't sleeping, and just everything was mixed up in his world. So the boss rearranged the man's schedule to accommodate the fact that he had a new baby in the house. Now that's friendship. That's saying, you as a person are valuable to me. I don't just think of you for what you can produce. I think of you as my friend. And so this is how we have to think about it. We have to this is how we build a team that really flourishes. Everybody flourishes in it. And impartial. You have to be, even if somebody close to you does something improper, that's really improper, you can't excuse them just because they're close to you. I remember a circumstance at Ananda where there was a department that Swami had worked so hard to build. It had taken him years to really get it built up, to get the right team in there. And then it turned out that the man in charge was misusing his position. He was taking privileges for himself. He wasn't taking money for himself exactly, but he was working with the money in a prejudicial way. And he wasn't being transparent about everything he was doing. It had been going on for a little while. Swami kept trying to sort of hold it at bay, but then just literally one morning, Swami was actually out of the country, and it was happening in California. In that morning, people in charge in California communicated to Swami that there was too much evidence that real improper action was happening. And that afternoon, Swami just closed the whole department down, just like that. Invited the leader, the transgressor, to come to where Swami was, to see what Swami could do to save him, not to punish him, but to save him from his wrong actions. It did not turn out well, but that was the way it came out. But Swami just said, when there's real dharma means something that's just not right, that violates the principles of righteousness. He said, I would close all of Ananda if there was adharma going on. If we were not, where there's dharma, there is victory. Where there is a lack of righteousness, there is no chance of success. So even though it had taken years for Swami to get it to that point, he closed it just like that. And he didn't hesitate. So he was impartial. Now, the part of this that I wanted to say was that person was also someone that Swami had worked with a great deal and given a lot of attention and energy and time and care and love to. But he was impartial. He was just not going to, let him get away with something that no one else would be allowed to get away with. Swami continued to try to save him, but the man's pride was too much. he felt humiliated and exposed, and he could never recover from it, so he drifted on, went somewhere else, which was a great heartbreak for all of us, because he was a friend. But the impartial expression of the principles upon which Ananda was based demanded that action. And Swami was very sad about it. He was sad for the person. He was also very sad for the project. He just said, oh, I've spent so much time getting us to this point, and now it's gone. But I'd close everything rather than do something that's not righteous. So, select those with whom you work closely for their qualities of selflessness, of putting the good of all ahead of their own personal interests. And then don't bypass the lines of authority. I've looked at that paragraph. This is 2 sentences, and I've looked at this several times, because and then don't bypass the lines of authority also, I didn't see how it fit together, but now I do, and I want to explain it. But the first part of it is, select those with whom you work closely for their qualities of selflessness and of putting the good of all ahead of their own personal interest. He doesn't say, select people for their brilliance, select people for their efficiency. He says, select them for their selflessness and their willingness to put the good of all ahead of others. Over many years, Ananda has gradually developed a clergy, ordained ministers and ordained light bearers, which is two categories of ministers, so to speak. And we've never had a seminary. We've never had a formal ministerial training program or anything like that. It's more like we live together, we get to know each other, and then ordination seems appropriate. So from time to time, people have asked Swami Ji to define what is it that, what defines an Ananda minister? And Swami's definition has come down to this. An Ananda minister is someone who, even in the midst of their own difficulties, is still able to put the welfare of others first, is still able to think first of the well-being of others. Even if they're facing their own challenges, the well-being of others, they still have the willpower, the clarity of mind, the discipline, the generosity of heart to remember the welfare of others first. And that's the story of Ananda. That pretty much defines it. That's what we're doing here. This is where the whole conversation earlier about, how do you overcome your weaknesses? Do you overcome them by concentrating on them, or do you overcome them by generating a positive flow of energy toward the light? So Swamiji is saying, select the people you work most closely with for those who are selfless and will put the welfare of others above their own. That doesn't mean, now I have to have this accurately. He's not saying that you should be, what's the word? You don't denigrate yourself. You don't diminish yourself. But you just behave, and the word is appropriately. And you put the true welfare of others above your own. You don't necessarily put people's egoic desires, egoic preferences. You don't put their selfish interests above your own interests, per se, because you put their welfare. And their welfare means that you don't support them in unrighteous action. You don't just let them have their way. You're not trying to make them happy. You're not trying to please them. You're trying to inspire them also to do what is correct. And true friendship includes saying, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I told the story some time ago about my friend Haridas when he was having to work an extra job when he was just helping to start the center in Sacramento. There just wasn't enough income. And he knew his boss was going to ask him to do something unrighteous. And when the day finally came and his boss asked him to do it, I don't know whether it was faking an invoice or what it was, Haridas just said, oh, I can't do that. That's all he had to say. But there was so much like, oh, I can't do that. That's not righteous. And the man just said, okay. Haridas had worried about it for a long time. How was this going to come out? Because even in that case, Haridas was a subordinate, but he was not going to put, it wasn't in that man's best interest for Haridas to cooperate with something unrighteous. So even if you're selfless and generous, when somebody wants something from you that's unrighteous, you have to say no. And that's very different. You see, this is not being a people pleaser at all. This is having the strength of character to be appropriate in your response. Appropriate according to dharma. I use the word righteousness and dharma together. The best definition of dharma is that which leads to higher consciousness, those actions which lead to higher consciousness. Enabling someone to do the wrong thing, wrong in a moral or a legal sense, but wrong in the sense that it's not in their best interests. Now, of course, you have to be appropriate because you have to win people in the right way. But those are the kinds of people you want close to you, who have high values and have the courage and the spine, which is some way you think about it. Spineless is the opposite, but the spine to make the hard decisions. I was having a conversation not too long ago with someone who's facing a difficult personnel problem, and they're going to have to stand up to what this person is doing because the other person is not behaving properly. And the person I was talking to is a very nice person, but it's not in their nature to stand up. But welcome to leadership. You have to stand for something. And your understanding of the need to help others more than you want to help yourself, meaning the mere fact that if I had a choice, I wouldn't do this, I have to do it because it's my responsibility as a leader. I have to stand for the truth of this situation. And the sacrifice of self is not self-abnegation, that's the word. It's not self-abnegation. It's putting aside my own preferences. I prefer not to confront. I prefer not to have to make the hard decision. I prefer not to go against his desires. I prefer not to make him angry at me. Too bad. If it's your job to stand for something, you have to stand for it. So selflessness is not just always, I give in. No, not at all. Selflessness is, I put righteousness above my own preferences. Very, very powerful. And those are the people that you want with you, because then all the way through your organization, those kinds of values will hold. Swamiji never gave people positions of leadership just because they wanted them for ego reasons. He just could never do it. It was sort of a joke at and on, and nobody who wanted to be a leader got to be a leader, and only those people who didn't want to got to be leaders. And I mean, it wasn't 100% true, because wanting is probably the confusing word. I mean, people know what their own destiny is. They have a responsibility and they know what they were born to do, and they move into it and they're willing to do it. And taking responsibility, that's what leadership is. So many people are willing to take responsibility. I want to see it done. And that means I take leadership. And then I take what comes with it also. And then Swami has that next sentence. And then don't bypass the lines of authority. And I think the reason he puts it next to that is because just because you're friends with someone else, or maybe you have a closer friendship with somebody down the line, don't start with them, because it completely undermines everything. Everything ceases to run at that point. It's totally disrespecting the people that you've put in positions of authority. And so, you have to, once you set up that so-and-so has certain responsibilities, you have to support them in those responsibilities. And you have to show others that you support them in those responsibilities. Because if you don't, then you eviscerate them. If you actually talk to someone 2 steps down the road, and this, the man you've put in charge hears about it from someone 2 steps down the road from him, he feels completely, he's impotent now in his position. And also, if the authority is flowing from you and he's outside of the loop, it's humiliating. And it's also completely ineffective. You have to, even if you know that this one down here is more competent, you still have to, don't ever bypass the lines of authority. This happened to Swamiji when he was in the ashram, when he was with his guru after Master had passed. Swamiji had a position of authority over the monks in the monastery, but some of the monks had direct relationships with, as it happened, some of the senior nuns who were senior to Swami in the work. Senior nuns who were even on the board of directors, and it wasn't inappropriate that the monk would have some kind of a friendship with this senior nun, because they may have had a karmic connection, and she might have been able to help him in certain ways that were beneficial. But she would give direct instructions to one of these monks that would contradict the instructions that Swamiji had given. And all of a sudden, Swami had no authority. He just had no authority. He was supposed to be guiding these monks and running this monastery, but if someone senior to him could just come in and just, without even consulting Swami, just giving this man permission to do something completely contrary to their rules, which is exactly what happened. And Swami tried to explain to the senior nun why you just can't do this, but she couldn't see it. She just thought, well, why not? I'm senior to you, basically. And Swami just got to experience firsthand how confusing that was. I've experienced it in the course of Ananda, where someone that is in the community that I'm ostensibly responsible for has a direct relationship to other people who have authority, more authority than I do overall, or equal authority overall. And suddenly there's a whole something going on that I don't even object to, but I don't know about it. And so all this energy is moving away from what we're trying to make happen here, and I don't know about it. So we at Ananda over years, because it was something that happened to us quite by accident, because we all had friends. And it's wonderful. That's one of the wonderful things about Ananda, is that we have so many different personalities and so many different long-time devotees, and we can all just form bonds in all directions. But we always have to be aware of the fact that, well, if we really start talking about, you're going to do this or you're going to do that, you really need to go talk to so-and-so. You really need to go tell so-and-so. I found myself in the odd position once of knowing some very important fact, interpersonal fact that was going on in someone else's community. Just by a circuitous way, that information came to me, and I knew it was critical information for the community leaders to know. And I had to send word back that if you don't speak to the community leaders, I'm going to have to do it. Because I felt now that I was bypassing the lines of authority, even though I was only peripherally involved. But just the fact that I knew it, and I've experienced it enough to understand how demoralizing it is. So it's a very subtle point. And it's not like we have to be rigid. It's just that we have to respect each other's responsibilities and put ourselves into that other person's shoe. How will you feel when your subordinate tells you something that really you should have known? Or you make plans because this whole energy is moving over here and you don't know about this energy. So all your plans, again, you look foolish. And it's inefficient. And it's not friendship and respect. It's not impartial friendship and respect. You have to love everybody. You have to love everybody equally. You have to behave appropriately, and you have to trust. You have to trust. I mean, things get complicated, I recognize. In our ashram community, people have personal lives, and often the issues are very personal. So I recognize that it gets complicated. But Swami's point is profoundly important, even in an ashram situation. It's profoundly important. We should always keep it in mind. God bless you, my friends.